Welcome back to the Psychedelic Scene Podcast. I'm your host, Jill Sitnick. Think of me as your psychedelic big sister. And today we are talking about veterans, trauma, and psychedelic healing with Will Burkhart. He's a former Marine Corps intelligence officer and psychedelic coach. You'll find that this is a grounded, honest conversation about what veterans are really seeking, what healing takes with that population, and why this work matters so much. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Scene Podcast. I'm your host, Jill Sitnick. Think of me as your psychedelic big sister. I am here today with Will Burkhart, and I'm kind of excited because Will is someone, I just joked with him that if there was a zombie apocalypse, I want him standing in front of me. So hi, Will, welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Joe.
He's kind of like, what did I get myself into with this podcast? Okay. So let me introduce Will to you, and you'll understand why I want him in front of me for the zombie apocalypse. Okay. Will is a Naval Academy graduate, former Marine Corps intelligence officer, adventure guide, explorer, and co-active certified professional coach. He has also extensive experience as a registered investment advisor and commercial real estate investor. He has spent his life seeking truth and exploring what's possible. This has led him to many extreme experiences. Get ready, everybody, including the U.S. Army Airborne and the Ranger Schools, combat tours in the Middle East and Africa, wilderness adventure racing, holistic healing modalities, psychedelics, and coaching. He is relentless in his passion to explore life's magnificence, to unleash the inner badass. I love that I now have permission to curse a little bit. He is the owner and facilitator of Badass Coaching and Badass Adventures, offering psychedelic catalyzed coaching retreats, transformational courses, and unforgettable outdoor adventures worldwide. So everybody understand why I want like you by my side or in front of me at this point? Look at that career. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I've been pretty blessed to have some interesting life experiences, Jill. And it's taken me all over the world. I got to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And here we are sitting, talking about psychedelics and all that.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, so there is a specific reason why I think Will's background is going to be very, very impactful for this discussion. So the audience knows we are absolutely going to cover what are most veterans seeking through psychedelic experiences, because I'm not a veteran. I speak through the lens of child abuse with psychedelics. What are the results that Will has witnessed? And, the basic, what is stopping our society from embracing this healing modality already? I think those are important questions. I think from a veteran's point of view, we're going to get a very interesting perspective here. So with that said, I've done a lot of talking. Will, please introduce yourself to our audience. What's your origin story? How the heck do you find yourself on the Psychedelic Scene Podcast?
Yeah, if you'd asked me 10 or 15 years ago that we'd be having this conversation, Jill, I would have said you've probably been taking too much drugs. Because it wasn't a very clear, direct path, but somehow, here we are. As you said, I served in the early 90s in the Marine Corps, saw combat tours in the first Gulf War in Somalia. And it had a bit of my experience over there it didn't leave a particularly good taste in my mouth as far as just what we were doing and how things were going down. So, I got out of the military and, pursued some business type stuff. And then a lot of adventure. I found that the outdoors for me was my therapy. It's where I could just unwind and burn energy and stay, active and feel like I was healing, so to speak, even though I didn't realize that necessarily at the time. So I was able to adventure race all over the world, doing crazy stuff like, whitewater rafting, riding horses, riding camels in Morocco, just all kinds of craziness. And pushing the limits, my physical limits. And what that opened up during that time was, a very intense physical experience that would last anywhere from 7 to 14 days. with a group of people, it turns into more than just a physical, experience. It gets into your psyche, it gets into your spirit, and really, like, yeah, you can learn things about yourself and see things in yourself that you couldn't if you're just sitting on a couch, binging Netflix. And so had a family, so that kind of steered into different direction, got into kind of holistic healing type stuff, worked with some different yoga, tai chi modalities and healing modalities, and had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
Got a lot out of it. And shoot, I guess it was about 12 years ago, a buddy of mine had shared with me about an ayahuasca experience he had and how profound it was for him. And
Sure.
It piqued my interest. I'm like, there's, when you hear something, you're like, oh, someday I'm going to do that. That kind of, you get that hit. And so that's the hit I got. It took me a couple of years before I actually did it. And ironically, it was through a friend of his that was able to facilitate it at his house, one-on-one. So it was a very beautiful experience, very dark experience, but very impactful. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend everybody's introduction to psychedelics be with ayahuasca for the very first one. But hey, we all have our way. And so I did a number of sits with psychedelics, with ayahuasca. The second sit that I did actually was around PTSD. Ironically, a couple of months after my first sit, the gal who facilitated that recommended that I go see a movie called From Shock to Awe. And I don't know if you're familiar with that movie, but it's a documentary that focuses on veterans suffering from PTSD who use ayahuasca and MDMA as healing modalities. And they had this at the Southwest School of Naturopathic Medicine. It was interesting because they did the screening, and then after the screening, they had a panel with some of the vets who were in the movie, as well as some doctors who could, speak to the mental health issues and all that. And, I sat there, I watched it, and I just kind of had a weird feeling kind of come over me as I was watching it. And I didn't really engage. I just watched it and left. And fortunately, a week later, I was scheduled to sit with ayahuasca, because the interim week, I was just like, it was all I could do to hold it together. Something about that movie triggered some latent PTSD in me, and I was pretty much a shit show for the better part of a week. So went into that ayahuasca experience, fortunately had a very, very skilled facilitator, and was able to work through a lot of PTSD issues in that 2-day sit. That was kind of the main focus of it. It was a very beautiful experience, very powerful. But that was kind of, that set me on my psychedelic journey. I was figuring I would just use psychedelics myself to work on what I had to work on, even though that, and to backtrack a little bit, I didn't get into psychedelics for that. I got into psychedelics after watching a Graham Hancock video on freeing your consciousness and consciousness expansion. So that was initially what got me into it. But never figured I would be working with people or facilitating. But as I started working with mushrooms by myself, it kept after me, like, okay, you need to help other people. You need to work with other people. And I was like, at first I'm like, no, that's just not my thing. Like, you've got the wrong guy, so to speak. And then finally, after enough sits where this came up, I was just, all right, just fine. Like, I gave up. I'm like, show me how this is going to happen. And it happened, and so over the last 7 years, I've, gotten my coaching certifications, gotten facilitator training with 5-MeO-DMT, and have been able to develop what I call a psychedelic catalyzed living program, where I can basically work with folks, veterans and other people who are interested in integrating psychedelics into their life in a consistent way, such that, it's either healing, it helps them create from, their inner essence, whatever it is. So that's just a little bit about how I'm, got from the battlefields in the Gulf War, where, I never did drugs to today where I facilitate, psychedelic experiences for folks and use them myself to sort my own shit. So
I was a corporate girly.
Right.
I was not going to have my brain eggs fried in the frying pan. I was 47 when, therapeutically they were introduced to me. And so I'm with you. What are you talking about, drugs? I actually don't even consider them drugs. I think we have such a negative connotation with that. So what I think is really important here is child abuse survivors tend to gravitate to child abuse survivors. My impression is that veterans would tend to gravitate to veterans. So there's a lot in your head that will speak to our veteran audience that I don't really know much about, because to be candid, I've just never been on a battlefield. So let's get to the first question, and then I think this conversation is just going to expand. In your opinion, what are most veterans seeking with psychedelic experiences?
The headline reason is generally PTSD, Jill.
Right.
I find that it goes a little deeper than that. And the example I like to use is oftentimes I'll meet somebody, they'll find out I'm a vet, and one of the first things they'll do is they'll thank me for my service.
Yes.
And it always lands on me just a little bit funny. And the reason for that is, as an intelligence officer, even though I was at the tactical level, I got to see kind of behind the curtain, so to speak, as to what was really going on. And it was disturbing. And the reason it's disturbing is, ostensibly, I got into the military thinking I was serving my country, protecting democracy, spreading freedom, all that sort of thing, kind of idealistic. Yeah. And once you get in and you see under the hood, you realize that a lot of what our military is asked to do has nothing to do with protecting our freedom and spreading democracy. We are essentially pawns for the military industrial complex. And we're just there to make them money and create, these conflicts where they can line their pockets with cash. And so I think for a lot of veterans,
how appropriate that conversation is at January 2026.
Right. Yeah. It's becoming pretty self-evident to a lot of people. But what that does for a lot of vets is they have a deep knowing once they're in and they've been exposed to what's really going on. There's that incongruity at a very deep level where they thought they were doing and going in for one thing, but then the reality of it was completely different. So there's an inherent mistrust and an inherent wow, what have I done? This isn't what I signed up for. And that does at a very deep level create a lot of agitation and unease and a lot of distrust. So at the fundamental level, you have that going on with a lot of vets. Okay. And then they're asked in that space where they know at some point they're just pawns, they're asked to commit, quite atrocious acts. They're basically being asked to kill or potentially be killed. And that can be a very, very scary situation, right?
For somebody else's profit.
Yeah, for someone else's profit. And so then they're in that situation and they get exposed to that repeatedly over time. And that just layers on more and more, drama and just shit. And, and then, they're removed from that, they try to go back to their quote normal life. And that doesn't work. It's like they've got all this pent up anger and emotion, sadness, fear inside that they aren't allowed to necessarily process when they're in the military, because when we're supposed to be tough guys. We're supposed to keep it together. We're supposed to accomplish the mission. So they bottle all this up and then they go home and they get addicted to substances. They get abusive with their family. They have a hard time holding down a job, all these things. And that's what saddens me the most, because that's the collateral damage that has nothing to do with the battlefield, but it's basically bringing all the damage of the battlefield home, into our American homes. And then you just see the fallout, the broken homes, just the nasty underbelly of it. And those are all just symptoms, those are symptoms of just real, dehumanizing our veterans, dehumanizing people.
So they can do the job.
That's, yeah. And, ironically, that's what the military trains its members to do, is dehumanize the enemy. Because if you can dehumanize the enemy, they're much easier to kill. If you're looking at them as though they're not human, it's much easier to execute your mission.
Right.
And then, we realize at some point that the tables have been turned, and our own military has actually dehumanized us. And that really sets up a very, very, deep level of, trauma, of distrust, of just inner turmoil in the vet. So I just give you a little bit of that background because, again, PTSD, those are the symptoms. And, that's what will ostensibly bring veterans to me. And with psychedelics, I'm not necessarily treating the symptoms. The symptoms are just the feedback. They're the feedback that is giving both of us is to, okay, are we getting to some of these root issues? Are we allowing you to release some of these experiences that you couldn't fully process in the moment? Are we able to get you through that such that those symptoms are able to abate?
Yes.
And you're able to basically be a human again, and be in touch with your humanity and the compassion that they have within, and the spirit that has been largely squashed, and move forward with their life in a more productive, creative way. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what I do deal with a lot with veterans.
Well, I think what I'm hearing, and also kind of what I've read, so my impression is, at least with child abuse stuff, people are living their lives until suddenly they just can't live their life anymore. Something is stuck, something won't move, and they're just at a point where it's too painful to continue. So they've got to make some sort of change. So you're nodding your head. Yeah. So that sounds familiar. And so veterans with experience, obviously in battlefield, in the war, in any sort of combat, they're coming to you. They've got a set of symptoms, same way child abuse folks have a set of symptoms. And I'm going to say it this way. I tend to like to say that I help people unwind the knots. The knots were created at a certain point. Psychedelics and integration and preparation can all help to untie those knots. And sometimes they open really quickly, and sometimes it takes a while to kind of needle it through. So
Absolutely.
How my land, it's like very similar.
The interesting thing is, again, like we have different populations, right? We have a veteran population. We have a population of people who, suffered from child abuse. And, again, the circumstances are the circumstances, right? That each population suffered their trauma. But again, I don't focus so much on the circumstances. Those are the symptoms. Right. The circumstances created the symptoms. The process to unwind it, to your point, is the same largely. We're just working with different conditions, but the underlying process to really get at the root cause and for them to unwind and release are essentially the same. Yeah.
I just think it's helpful that people who can, people who have lived a similar experience really seem to jive well working with psychedelics. There's like this fundamental understanding that helps provide the client with a feeling of safety, I think. So Will, when you're working with folks and they're walking in the door, they've got, they're showing the symptoms from the PTSD trauma from their military service.
Yeah.
Do you then often find that once that layer is kind of worked with, that folks go to another layer because none of us escape our childhood unscathed?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, ideally, yeah. Once we're able to have them work through those initial layers, yeah, then we get into the childhood trauma and some of the deeper underlying things.
Yeah.
And it's a process and it takes time. You know, that's one thing I think that's a common misperception in psychedelic, you know, at least the promotion of psychedelics is it's some, you know, silver bullet and you know, you
Yeah.
say do one sit and you're going to be healed. You know, that's why I call it psychedelic catalyzed living, because it's like, okay, how often are we going to need to sit? How deep are you going to be able to go?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, not only is it, oh gosh, it's 10 years of therapy in 8 hours, but oh, those 8 hours are lovely because you're on a psychedelic. And it's like, oh
yeah,
no.
no. Yeah.
Oh no. When you have to re-feel all the stuff that you felt the first time around that was too painful to process, and you got to feel that again and process it, that's not fun stuff. It's just not fun.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of them have so dissociated in the moment of the trauma that they never felt it in the first place. So for a lot of this is the depth that they're feeling it is the first time. And, you know, I've had clients, they're like, you know, they think they're having a heart attack, you know, like it's that painful. And, you know, it's crazy how the body protects itself and how it works around trauma and just then the release of it. I'm sure you've seen it as well. It's not pleasant.
I find people can sometimes be very confused because they're like, what is this? And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, it's
Oh, yeah.
probably a toddler that you don't remember, you know, and they're like, this
Yeah.
feels awful. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Well, then clearly you are experienced in this field. Can you give the audience very realistic? I love that already. You're like, this is a process. Tell us a little bit about kind of what you've seen, what you've witnessed in terms of veterans healing, the process, kind of if we have a veteran listening who says, "Oh, I might be able to use some help them kind of understand what you've seen."
Yeah. So, first of all, I do a pretty in-depth screening process with the folks I work with. So, you know,
Good.
they fill out questionnaires. We do coaching on the front end to really A, build trust, and B, get a real sense and as full a picture as we can of what we're working with.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I'm very collaborative in how I work. I don't have a cookie cutter protocol per se. I work with a lot of different psychedelics. I work with psilocybin, MDMA, 2CB, LSD, 5-MeO-DMT, and Bufo. And so then there's a process of matching the psychedelic with the client, like what really resonates for them.
Thank
And
you. There's so many
yeah,
people who are medicine blind and think like the one medicine they know can solve every. Thank you. I'm sorry
right.
to jump in, but yes, matching the medicine
Yeah,
with the person.
exactly. Yeah. So, you know, because again, it's, what I'm trying to get the vets to do and any of my clients to do as early as possible is to tap into their instincts, their intuition, and their gut, because that's what the psychedelic is going to open in them. And as long as we have alignment, you know, with them, then the psychedelic experience is going to go much smoother. And so we basically we work all that out, and I generally will have a 2-day sit initially with clients, 2 full days with whatever psychedelics we decide to use, and with integration worked into each day. And you hit on a very common theme, which was confusion. A lot of the vets I work with, there's a couple of consistent themes. One is confusion, and one is paranoia. Yeah, the paranoia is definitely there, and the confusion is there, and so we work through a lot of that, and we just we basically I try to find what I call the optimal dose and the optimal depth for the who I'm working with. So we
Right.
want to get in that therapeutic sweet spot, is what I call it,
Right.
to where they aren't completely overwhelmed. They can have agency in the experience and navigate it so
Yes.
that even though it can be confusing, we're still able to make enough sense that when they come out, we can connect the dots
And they
and we
still
can be
feel
like,
a
oh,
sense of control.
exactly right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've had to undo with a number of clients where the facilitator was a little too aggressive with the dosing.
Yeah.
And it almost traumatized them in
Yeah.
the psychedelic experience. So, really getting that dosing right at the sweet spot for therapy is critical.
Yes.
And then it's a process with the veterans as to how do the experiences land on them? How fast are they able to integrate them and just kind of find that new equilibrium? Because ideally we've brought them into more of a state of equilibrium where they're able to live more of their life, in the way they want to. They aren't overwhelmed by anxiety or depression or all that stuff. And they're able to, start to put the pieces back together to whatever level they need to. And then it's a matter of working again, figuring out, okay, are we good? Have you integrated completely? And are you ready for the next sit? And which psychedelics do we want to use? And it's a process. I either I'm doing it wrong or whatever, but I found that it's a process. And I've worked with a couple of veterans for several years. One veteran sees me once a month. Another veteran sees me about once a quarter or 3 times a year. And,
Yep.
we find what works for them, what's going to support them. And really ultimately getting, I call it, there's a healing phase where we do the healing work and we get them, back to their center, back to their equilibrium point. And once enough healing has happened, then we get into what I call the creative phase, where it's like, okay, what life do you want to create? What are your dreams? So, so now they're able to really like tap deep into their, what they were put on this planet to do.
Yeah.
And that's when their lives really shift and really shine. But it's a process, right? And it's one of those things where the healing has to occur in a good way for them to then be able to step into their creating the life that they want.
There's a couple of things there. So first of all, the 2-day sit, I think, is very, very important. I think we have too many one and dones. There's different derogatory terms that I won't use here. But the idea that I always tell people is that the first time you sit with a medicine, you're learning the medicine. Are you going to get some sort of positive or something out of it? Absolutely. Just know the same way the first time you go ice skating, the same time, anything you do something new, you're going to be learning that process. So the idea of we're going to have a first session, and then we're going to monitor and adjust from the information that you got from the first session, how you felt, to the second session, because by the second session, they then kind of have an understanding that I'm in an enhanced state and I have not lost control. I'm not losing my mind. There's somebody here. And I find that second time, or even on retreats where I've gone like for 3 sessions, like you just keep getting deeper and deeper because you trust, because you've experienced it in a positive way. So I love that you just said that it's a 2-day thing with you.
Yeah. And what you're speaking to, Jill, is, I tell clients, you're developing a relationship with the psychedelic.
Yes.
And just like any relationship, the first time you sit, it's the first date, you're just learning about it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the more consistently you can sit with it, you're going to get more and more comfortable. And your relationship with it is going to get stronger. You're going to feel more agency in it, and you'll be able to get deeper. And just like you don't go on a first date and ask a girl or a boy to marry you, you don't do the same with psychedelics. It's, there's a lot of time between that first date and the altar, so to speak. So
one would hope, or else you probably should sit with some.
Yeah.
I think the other part that is known kind of in the psychedelic circle, but I think is going to be ignored once more the marketing starts coming out, is the occasional or scheduled breaks to go ahead and kind of, I'm going to use the word reset and this is a Jill word. I sometimes use psychedelics now to just kind of clear the cobwebs. Something's bothering me. Something came up from 10-year-old Jill, and I just want to clear the cobwebs out and things of that sort. And people have said to me, well, I can't believe you still have to do that. And I'm like, well, life still happens. And you don't go to the gym once. You don't go to the gym for a year and then just give up working on your physicality. Why would I give up working on my mental health? And I think, I'm probably like one of your veterans doing it once a quarter,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's, people will be like, oh my gosh, well then it's just like every other medication that you're stuck with. And I'm trying to explain to people, no, it's very much when you see a need or when something's coming up or continuing to untie a specific knot.
Right.
So you have people coming quarterly, you have people coming monthly. Is that relatively common after the first experience with you?
It is. It is. And, you use that gym analogy, which is an analogy I use a lot. You don't go to the gym once a week and expect to get big gains, right? You go consistently. Anything we do in life that we want to, have an impact, we have to do it consistently. Yeah. And ironically, the drug companies will have you take pills daily, pills with countless side effects, and pills that over the long haul have limited success. But, hey, they'll get, take one in the morning and one at night, and people don't think twice because a doctor said it. Right. And, that's part of what has disillusioned vets so much is the VA will pump them pills and they don't work. This stuff doesn't work. Right. So that's that aspect of it. And then to your point, and, it's like, consistency is key. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I do is, I work a lot with 5-MeO-DMT. The reason I do that is because I can dose it very precisely and I can dose it at a very light therapeutic level. So I can literally have someone on a 1/16th of a full dose pen and be having a conversation with them. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing to really integrate with that because they're integrating real time. They haven't gone offline. Yep. And so we work through and again, like that could be once a month, right? And they go out and they kick it for a month and then we come back in and we work with whatever. Now, maybe every 3 or 4 sits, they'll be moved and it'll be time to go in deeper or longer. So then we'll go in deeper or longer and dig into whatever there is to dig into. Yeah. Or even, and that's in the healing realm. Then there's the creation realm where it's like they come in once a month and they're working on a project and they get the inspiration with some low dose work and they go out and they do their thing. And then every once in a while, they're like, I want to get deeper into my creative process. So we'll go deeper. So you and I think are of similar mindset in that.
I think low dose work, especially with 5, is starting to get more attention. I think it is an incredible tool. One of the ways I described low dose work was like taking a brick wall apart, brick by brick. Like you can have scalpel-like precision for what you want to work on. It's a short period of time. You can start to dig at that versus you're not, I'm going to use the word stuck. You're not stuck in a 5-hour journey and you're not really sure how much progress you're making. Like 5 dosed properly is, I think, the better terminology, can move the needle in a way that I think people don't expect.
I totally agree. And I like your analogy of the brickwork and like one brick at a time. And the other thing I've found useful for some of the deeper work or the mid-level work is I'll couple 5 with an underlying psychedelic at a lighter dose. So, I'll maybe use a gram or so of mushroom and they'll get into their mushroom experience for a bit. And then we'll layer in low dose 5 and it opens it up in a different way. LSD and 5-MeO-DMT work really well together. Again, if you dose the underlying LSD at a moderate level, like 50 to 60% of a full dose,
Mhm.
it just totally changes that LSD experience. And the 5 layered on top of it, it's amazing. Like you use a scalpel and
Scalpel.
it's amazing the
Yeah.
precision you can do. And, the nice thing about having an underlying psychedelic in a lighter dose, it does extend the experience a bit. And for sometimes people need an extended experience that
Sometimes they
isn't
do.
as
Yes.
intense. The intensity isn't there. But if they need some intensity, that 5, they can introduce the 5 into it and it'll intensify it for a short period. And then they'll come back and it's really, really effective. And it's an area I'm excited about because I've used myself as a guinea pig and work through it myself. And then the results I've seen with clients has just been phenomenal.
It's really interesting. My experience with LSD and trauma has been the LSD takes you there. Now, I've done a lot of work before my first LSD experience. So my LSD experiences have been, if there's trauma, it's going to be like, it's going to be a beacon. It's going to take you right there. So I would imagine for Jill, I can't speak for anybody else, though that combination would have been, okay, I'm having a hard time narrowing this down. Let's do the low dose LSD, put me on the path. And then when I'm kind of on the path and I'm going where I need to be, that introduction of the 5 can really help. That's where the brick wall is. Let's start taking it down.
Right.
I hadn't heard that combination before. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and the key again is in the dosing, right? Typically when, my first LSD experience, it was a full-on dose of LSD. Yeah, they tempered it with a little MDMA. It was a beautiful experience. But again, it's like you modulate the intensity to where you have agency, right? And yeah, it's so much easier for the person in the experience to navigate the experience, to maintain agency with it, and to really hone in on the issues without being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of facilitators tend to rely too much on the psychedelic, so they dose it too strongly and just kind of let the psychedelic quote do its work. And I think I'll call bullshit on that. I think it's a cop out. Like, no, like we can be very, very precise with how we're dosing things so that we find that sweet spot so that people feel empowered in it. And, and they aren't afraid of it, and, I don't know about you, but, one of the biggest things, especially when I mention LSD to people, there's such a stigma around it. It's one of the best freaking psychedelics on the planet. Like, it's amazing, and back in the day, the founder of AA wanted LSD to be a part of the AA program, So I mean, it's not like it hasn't been known for a while. Right. But again, dosing it in a good way, dosing it in a more moderate way, just changes the whole experience for folks. And to your point earlier, you can do it more consistently, right? It's like going to the gym. It's like, we do it quarterly, we do it monthly, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think for traumatized populations, I'm going to expand beyond your audience, my audience. I know when I first went into my therapy, I had a tremendous fear of not having agency because as a child, I never knew when the slap or the kick or the hit across or the throwing around the room was going to happen. So the idea of being powerless or not having agency was terrifying. So for anybody listening, the proper dosage will allow you to have control. And that you are not going to be, I'm going to actually use the word unprotected. From a child abuse perspective, being unprotected, like not cool. Well, so clearly we're on the same page with the lots of stuff. I think I know a number of the answers to this next question. It'll be interesting to see your perspective. So, why as the U.S. society, I know we're starting, but, why haven't we embraced this for veterans when clearly there's a need?
Yeah, I think it's, as a military intelligence officer, I was really familiar with what we call psychological operations or PSYOPs. And Yeah, it's basically where where you're using propaganda and different tools to change the hearts and minds of your enemy in this case to kind of come to your side and not resist and turn on their own armed forces and all that.
Right.
The reason I bring that up is, there's a fine line between psyops and like marketing and political messaging and the narrative, right? And I grew up in the just say no to drugs era, right? Where, good old Nancy Reagan and just say no and, all that bullshit and
Yeah.
LSD is going to put holes in your brain and all that. And,
Right.
Again, not knowing, I believed it, right? So, and then I had an
Me too.
older brother who was a pothead. And so he was an example of what not to do because my mom, was all pissed at him. So,
Yep.
so there's that, there's literally, been since the 70s, there's been a concerted effort to demonize psychedelics.
Yes.
And it's been very effective. Now, if we can take a step back out of that propaganda and look at the actual reality of the therapeutic options that we have out there, right? And then even just the drugs that are out there.
Right.
If you look at the reality of it, the pharmaceutical solutions are not very effective. Like they just aren't. And I think a lot of mental health professionals would agree that like what they're prescribing, especially as far as drugs, they might have initial they might be initially effective to kind of snap people out of a pattern, but over the long haul they're just not as effective. So there's a couple of things. There's really overcoming the how we've been conditioned to relate to psychedelics. And then looking at the reality of, okay, how are we being steered and how effective is that? And just, getting real with people and say, hey, like, and then, educating them about what psychedelics how they can really be useful. And, but without even over glamorizing psychedelics, because again, they're just a tool. And one thing we all know is human beings,
and not every psychedelic is for everybody. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And like I'm not, I tell people, I don't try to sell people on taking psychedelics. I don't even think psychedelics are for everyone.
Right.
It's like, no, if you're called to it and I was talking to a client this morning or a potential client this morning. I told him, I'm like, hey, you have to come to me. Because what that tells me is you have a willingness to go into that space. And without that willingness, you're not going to have a positive experience. So yeah. I digressed a little bit, but ultimately, there's a re-education component to it. There's a hey, let's get real component to it. There's a deconditioning component to, waking people up. And ultimately, all of that is getting people out of the fear. And you touched on something that's very key. And, the key is trauma, and our response to trauma is a lack of control and overwhelming fear. Mm-hmm. And it's that lack of control and that lack of agency. And when people hear about psychedelics, that's what gets triggered in them. And that triggers the fears, the exact same fears that their trauma has triggered years ago. So immediately you're like, oh, people are just like, oh, and I get it, right? It can be confronting. And until people, can confront those fears and realize, okay, like we can create a safe environment for you to go to unsafe places and experience unsafe things, right?
So beautifully said.
And
yes.
So that's, ultimately like that is what I'm trying to create. And that's what I think we need to be able to put out to the world to try to, get some of these stigmas removed from psychedelics and the fear around it, so that they can, truly shine in their therapeutic potential. So
what I think is interesting from a female perspective, living in a very clear patriarchy, is that I feel like well, and Rick Doblin has even talked about this, that to make the introduction of psychedelic work for mental health palatable, that a population that I think everybody would say, yeah, let's help them, would be veterans versus women of XYZ abuse kind of thing. So there is a part of me that's like, seriously, how many congruent studies do we have to have on veterans? Couldn't we kind of put some domestic abuse studies together?
Right.
But at the end of the day, if we're getting any research done, thank goodness. I mean, they have been doing the VA. I'm not completely up on the exact stuff that the VA has been doing. I don't know when their targeted trials will end, but I do know they are putting money towards it. So that's helpful at this point.
Yeah, it's totally helpful, and it's necessary. And, I've chosen, as I think you've probably chosen, like, I don't need studies to validate the work that I do and the results that I see, right? And I'm not going to wait for them. I'm not going to wait for their studies to confirm what I'm, experiencing with the people that I'm working with. And it's not to say, that they shouldn't do those studies and those studies aren't valuable. They absolutely are. And I think, for me personally, like, I couldn't live with myself if I'm like, oh, I'm just going to wait until I'm given a green light by a study. The VA is a huge, huge bureaucracy. Like, that could take years. And even Rick with MAPS has run into, roadblocks.
Obstacle after obstacle. Yeah.
He thought he was there, a year or so ago, and then boom, they blew up his study, and now it's like almost back to square one. So, So, by all means, do your studies and gather all of that information. And in the meantime, for people who don't need those studies and they're ready to have the power of psychedelics positively impact their lives, come see you, come see me, come see another, guide and facilitator who they trust and can work with.
Yeah. So for somebody who's listening, and we have a pretty broad audience, how do they know they are ready to reach out to you? How do they know it's time for them?
The metric that I use, or the indicator that I use, is through their action. So they're going to know they're ready to work with me if they send me a text or send me an email and say, I want to meet you, or I want to have a conversation with you. So, a lot of people, they have to talk themselves into it. So they'll do their research, they'll talk to their friends, they'll, go through whatever they need to go through, speaking and contemplating. But ultimately, once they are moved to action, then I know they're ready, because they built up enough energy, they've gathered enough information, their fears have dropped to the level where they aren't frozen anymore, and they're willing to reach out and make that contact and commit to whatever program we develop for them, and then execute on that, right? And actually come and do their sits. But it's very much action oriented. It's like, okay, we're scheduling calls. You're flying out to see me, or we're setting up a weekend where I fly out to see them, or whatever it is. They're coming to a retreat that I'm offering. But it's they're actually moved to do it. And it's as simple as that,
I think I have an additional layer, and because I get a lot of people reaching out because they think it, one of the best examples was I had someone reach out because there was a family gathering in a month, and she wanted a journey within a week so she could be prepared and healed for that family thing. I'm like, no. Like, one of the layers that I have is, I know you reached out. Are you willing for this? What's your tolerance for the hard work that's going to now have to happen? And but quite frankly, I have some people drop off, and that's fine. So that's where that question came from. Like, how do they actually find you, kind of thing?
Yeah. And to your point, once they find me, then is it like, okay, are you ready to do the work? And I tell people, like, if you're a one and done, I'm not your guy.
Exactly. Because you're really not doing it. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Now, having said that, I don't presume to know what is best for my clients.
Hmm.
Now, a lot of my clients don't necessarily know what's best for them, but if I'm doing my job, I'm able to connect them so they can figure out what's best for them and they can arrive at
Agreed.
what's best for them.
Yes.
And as long as I can do that and they're like, hey, this is what resonates for me, as long as there's a deep resonation, I don't think they're trip seeking or trip chasing or any of that. Like, hey, more power to you if you can come sit with me for a weekend and be good. Like, awesome. Like, wow. Like, good on you. You've done enough work and prep work, and maybe you've done years of work, and this was just the final breakthrough that you needed. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't find that to be the case very often, but I'm open to it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are some situations that somebody just needs to get over a hurdle. Those people
Mhm.
are usually not the ones that are reaching out to me. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Will, my most favorite question that half of my guests give me an eye roll for, and I'm cool with that, is what question have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
I think the big question would be what can psychedelics do for our world?
Well, if that's a big question, okay.
It's a big question.
Go
It's a
ahead and
big
tackle
question.
that one.
It's a big question. And the reason I bring that question up is, all the research has been around, what I would call targeted populations, veterans, different, addictive personalities, different traumas, right? And the focus tends to be on that. And so people, I think, tend to think, oh, psychedelics aren't for me because I don't have this major trauma, or I'm not addicted. I don't have a major problem with addiction, or whatever it is. My life is
Right.
fine. And
Right.
the thing that I want to impress upon people is, you can be a perfectly successful middle-aged person, young person, whatever, thinking that life is hitting on all cylinders. And I think psychedelics can be just as useful and powerful for you as if you were, a drug addicted, trauma laden person.
Additional insight, additional perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really, and the reason I call it psychedelic catalyzed living is because, I don't care who you are. If you, want to stop bullshitting yourself, because the thing is most of us live in a state of delusion. Okay.
Yes.
It's just like, let's just be honest. We all live in a state of delusion. And most of our friends, the reason they're our friends is because they agree to allow us to have our delusion, and we agree to allow them to have their delusion. So we can be delusional together and get along. And so again, and that's fine. Like, hey, keep living in your delusion as long as you're aware that you're living in your delusion. But at some point, if you want to step out of your delusion, or, really get at some of your underlying bullshit and find out who am I? Who is the essence of me? And what am I here to create on this planet? Truly, beyond making money and, whatever. And so I think, psychedelics can be a very powerful tool for folks who that's simply what they want. They want to, get to know themselves at the deepest level, create from the deepest level, and spread that kind of magic. Because, when you connect with someone who realizes that, they're delusional and are done with it, it creates a whole different thing. It creates a whole different world that I think, a whole different dynamic. And so, again, I totally am behind the reality that psychedelics are a very useful tool for traumatized populations, whether they're veterans, childhood trauma, sexual trauma, all that. And same with the addicted populations. And there's a whole nother population that, you don't have to be completely jacked up to get benefits from it. So.
Yeah, the way I
There you-
explain it to people that we are all just children wrapped up in layers. Every adult is a child that's been wrapped up in layers, and those layers are different stories that we've, in some way, shape, or form, learned or been given by other people. And psychedelic work can let you kind of see around the corner of some of those stories and be like, hey, wait a minute, let's do some fact checking.
You
And
froze. Maybe I froze
everybody
too.
can benefit from that if they're interested
That's
in that
sad,
kind of
'cause you
work.
were
So
right
I
there.
agree with you. That was a really good answer to that general question. Thank you. All right. I want to thank you not only for the grounded conversation about, the practicality of veterans using psychedelics, but also the experience that you bring to the conversation. There's lots of people that are kind of entering this space now. You're a veteran of this space, dare I use that word. And I think your expertise here and your knowledge base is really valuable. In the world of podcasting, sometimes technical glitches happen, and so we didn't get to formally thank Will for being here, so I'll take this opportunity now. This was a delightful conversation because the main takeaway is that addressing symptoms like PTSD and creating environments that invite deeper healing require people with experience, and Will certainly has that experience. So whether you are a veteran or not, the conversation is a reminder about the power of these tools and the necessity to find people who really understand that power and are willing to meet you where you are. So with that said, if you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to like and subscribe. And if you're looking for more psychedelic content, head on over to psychedelic-scene.com. That's where you'll find a whole rich culture of music and books and, of course, this podcast. And if you like that content, consider getting Jason, our founder, a little cup of coffee, because he is the one who keeps the lights on like 24/7. And so with all of that, family, until next time, take care.